As you know, Netflix runs this like huge video streaming service, and everybody in the world is using it. And Netflix competes directly with Amazon Prime Video, and they are like head-to-head competitors here. I think Netflix is farther ahead, but still, they compete with each other. Interestingly, Netflix is built on AWS, which is also owned by Amazon. And it's interesting that Amazon is able to segment their product in such a way that they can be very, very friendly with Netflix in one aspect and also competitive with Netflix in a different aspect.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Today, I'm talking to Eli, and he's going to tell us all about how and why he is building a marketplace for geospatial data and algorithms. So before we dive into the interview today, I want to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by a company called HiveMapper, and this is the company that really could have helped me out when I was at university. I did this project and we were trying to build the biggest thermal map in the southern hemisphere at the time, and what we'd done is we'd taken a camera out of a BMW, so a thermal camera out of a BMW, and we mounted it on a plane and we flew it over the city of Christchurch, and that gave us a huge amount of data in video format. But what it meant is that I had to take every frame of that video data apart and stitch it together as images. It was a massive job, and this is exactly the problem that HiveMapper solves. With HiveMapper you can upload video footage to the platform and it automatically creates these 3D layers for you and georeferences them. So this is a really big idea and it's a really interesting concept. So if you're interested, go along to hivemapper.com and check them out. Okay, on with the interview. Hi Eli, and thank you so much for coming along and taking the time to do this interview with me. Much appreciated. I realize you're busy. You've just launched, or you've come out of the beta stage of Up42, your company, and I'd really like to talk to you about it. But before we dive into all that, maybe you could just tell the listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Um, my background. So, yeah, my name is Eli Tamanaha, and my background is all in software development. I started my career back in the day in 2004 in Seattle. I worked for a long time at Microsoft, later went to Amazon, which is also in Seattle. Moved to the Silicon Valley area and worked for Netflix. Then later moved further south to Los Angeles. I started my own company called DroneBase and was the founder and the CTO there. DroneBase was my first introduction to geospatial data, where we maintained a very large drone pilot network. We did a lot of business development with enterprises and took orders basically to capture drone imagery and video. Then we would dispatch those orders to our drone pilot network, and they would fly the drones according to our instructions, upload the imagery to our system, and then we would process it and deliver it back to customers. That was about 5 years ago. And since that time, like earlier this year, I came to Berlin, Germany, to run Up 42. Up 42 is a new company that also does geospatial data, but on a much bigger scale. So we're not just talking about drones anymore. It's about drones and satellites and planes, but also other kinds of geospatial data like weather and traffic and IoT. So it's a platform for using and analyzing geospatial data.
Okay, so that's a huge amount of information you've given us there, and that's fine. That's what I asked for, and I really appreciate it. Maybe we could start off by telling us where the name came from. Up42. It doesn't scream geospatial.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were being incubated, our code name was Interstellar. And that was an awesome name. Everybody loved it because it's sort of space related, and there's a cool movie with Matthew McConaughey in it. But unfortunately, we were not able to trademark the name Interstellar, and so we had to come up with a new name. Up 42 represents, well, the up part of it is a nod to Airbus, which is our parent company, because Airbus has the planes, the drones, and the satellites that fly in the sky. So up refers to that. And the number 42 comes from the famous science fiction novel, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And in that novel, it's a comedy. There is an advanced alien race that looks like mice, and they create a supercomputer the size of a planet, which they call Earth. And over the course of a long time, like a million years or something, they set this computer off crunching numbers to come up with the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and all things. And at the end of this, the result is the number 42. Of course, it is the ultimate answer. It's a comedy.
Yeah.
Of course, then they had to figure out like what is the question that 42 answers.
Yeah.
But in the tech world in general, I think 42 is a special number. It in general represents the ultimate answer. When you combine it with the up, it's like you get the ultimate answer from above, from the devices that give us geospatial data and insights.
Okay, that makes so much more sense now. I get it, especially after you describing or telling us about the parent company Airbus, which has this satellite infrastructure and are therefore collecting a lot of data, which I'm assuming is part of your platform. Okay, so we know a little bit about your background now. We have an understanding of where the name came from, which was very entertaining. Thank you. Maybe you could tell us what problem is Up 42 solving?
Yeah, so Up 42 is in this interesting space. The problem that we're solving is that there are a lot of companies out there in the world who could benefit from geospatial data. Like it would make their companies more efficient, their operations more efficient. Um, but they have a hard time accessing and using that data. If you put yourself into their footsteps or their shoes, um, to start, like how would you even access like high quality imagery from a satellite? You might try to reach out to a company that owns satellites. So maybe try to reach out to Digital Globe or to Planet or something like that. Um, and then you can't necessarily just sign up on their website and create a user account and just buy data. Like you have to get on a phone and you have to talk to a salesperson. And then there's this long contract negotiation process. Could take months, maybe 6 months. And at the end of that, you have to enter into a deal that is very, very big. Like it might be a lot more data and a much higher price point than you are able to pay for. So if you're a small or a medium-sized company, that pretty much is a barrier to entry. And then once you do have this data, like or this agreement in place, they might deliver the data through all different kinds of ways. Like they're not all modern, which is ironic, I think, because you would think of satellites as being like very advanced, like futuristic technology. But a lot of these companies don't even have an API, like an electronic interface that will allow your computer to connect to theirs, and then they just send you the data. Like sometimes they even like physically mail external hard drives to you. Um, so you got to figure out how you're going to get this data into your company or into your product in an efficient way. Um, then once you do have the data, like you got to figure out how you're going to process it. Raw satellite data is sometimes unwieldy, like it's very voluminous. There's a lot of pixels in it. And you got to figure out how you're going to process it. Maybe you need to do some machine learning or some artificial intelligence that will recognize objects in the image. Or maybe you need to run it through a few filters that will sharpen the image, or specifically look for colors that you're trying to detect. So there's the processing part of it. Maybe you have to create your own algorithm in-house, or you contract with an analytics company in the industry that specializes in that. But either way, like you're going to have to figure out how you're going to integrate those algorithms into your product. And then once you've done all of this, like you have this other problem where you need to have some sort of a compute infrastructure that runs it all. Um, and maybe you're not a tech company, so like maybe you're in the agricultural space. You need to figure out how you're going to set up the servers in AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Azure. Um, the servers that are going to crunch all of this data, process it, and basically come up with the product to use. So This is a really, really big problem. I think it repels a lot of businesses out there. It's too hard to use geospatial data in a nutshell right now. That's the problem that we're solving.
Yeah, and I think I would actually go a step further and point out that perhaps there's a human element to all this as well. Like when you're describing the barriers to entry there, I think you missed the important point that companies need to realize that the way they could benefit from this data in the first place. Otherwise, you would not even venture out on this journey, right? So they need to have that understanding that hey, we could benefit from this. This would be advantageous to us in some way, shape, or form. If we did this, we would save money, we would save time. There would be some
Yes.
sort of benefit to us. And I think without that sort of in-house expertise, that'd be really difficult for companies to come to that conclusion.
I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, there's a huge educational piece out there. And I think that because companies have not had easy access to this kind of data, they have not done a whole lot of experimentation, which is limiting like the number of use cases out there. So if we can lower the barrier to entry, we'll get a lot more companies using this data, just experimenting with it and seeing like, hey, can I use this data to, I don't know, map my farm or something like this, and or help me to measure the health of my crops. Um, and as they start to experiment with these use cases and they start to learn the value of geospatial data, then we'll see the data being used much more broadly and much more efficiently.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I think now we've done a really good job of sort of listing out those barriers to entry in terms of getting access to this data and what it could do for different organizations. How could you maybe walk us through the user journey? How are you removing these barriers to entry? What are you doing that's going to make access to this significantly easier for people?
Okay, yeah. So, so Up42 is a platform, and what we do on a pretty big scale is we reach out to other companies in the industry that either provide data or they provide analytics. And we talk to them, we form agreements with them, and we integrate them onto our platform. So right now, there's like over 30 different companies that are integrated into Up42, and they're offering their data or their services on the platform. And what I'm talking about is like Airbus is one, right? So they obviously they're a parent company. They're going to be integrated. Um, all of the Airbus data is available on Up42. So if you wanted imagery from a Pleiades satellite, which is high resolution imagery, um, instead of going through, talking to a salesperson and going through a lengthy contract negotiation process, you could just come to Up42, create a user account, and then use that integration. You would get easy access to that data. And then when it comes to the analytics providers, these are companies like Orbital Insight, for example, or Pink Matter or Live EO. They have algorithms that will process this sort of data. Those algorithms are integrated onto Up42 as well. And so what this does is it gives you as a customer a place to come. You simply select the data that you want to use. You can select the algorithms that you want to funnel that data into. And it could be multiple algorithms. And then at the end of it, the result you can either download through our website, or if you have a big company and you want to integrate through an API, we have a modern API for you to integrate with, and that forms your workflow. So without doing too much work, you can have access to lots of data or analytics all across the industry from the experts pretty easily.
So up until this point, we've talked about satellite data, we've talked about imagery, but I know from the pre-interview that you have plans to integrate all kinds of geospatial data. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So yes, it starts with satellite imagery because of Airbus. But in the near future, we will be integrating other kinds of data as well. So it'll be drone data, airplane data, it'll be traffic, weather, IoT. It's geospatial data in general. And when I say geospatial, I don't need to define this. When I do, what I mean is any kind of data that is associated with a real world location. So if I pull up my bike sharing app on my phone, which I use a lot here in Berlin, I see the locations of all of the bicycles around the city that I can go and rent. Um, that is geospatial data too. So any kind of geospatial data, that's what we welcome onto the platform. And we hope that with a combination of data sources, different kinds of data, it'll allow customers to pick and choose and combine and create interesting, sophisticated solutions.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the reasons why I approached you guys and to do this interview with was because I find that this is a fascinating idea. This is a great idea, combining the data sources and the algorithms in one place, and especially with an interface it's easy for people to understand and use. And I remember you describing it in the pre-interview as a series of blocks where you could sort of drag and drop and move pieces of the algorithm around to create different outputs.
That's right. So the mental model that I have is it's a box of Legos, and I used to play with Legos when I was a kid, so I'm very fond of that. Um, yeah, so you come onto the platform, and each of these data sources and each of these algorithms for processing algorithms is in the form of a block. And we as a platform do a lot of work to make sure that each of these blocks is interoperable, meaning you can snap the blocks together and connect them. And so as a customer, you can come and you can start with a data block, and then you can snap onto that a processing block or other data blocks. Um, and then you can just keep snapping blocks together. You can form an entire workflow this way and then save it. That becomes your workflow. And then when you want to actually use that workflow, you point it to a specific place in the world, an area of interest, and you say, okay, now I'm interested in running this workflow on a specific farm in Nebraska, for example. Um, and then you can just run it. The data will flow from the data block into the processing blocks and then out the web interface or the API. It's a box of Legos. It's meant to be easy to use.
Yeah, and again, if we think about this in terms of the opportunity here, I mean, it's massive. If you're talking about, at some stage anyway, integrating all types of geospatial data, I'm assuming we can also integrate all types of geospatial processing algorithms, and that gives a massive amount of opportunity in terms of what people can do on this platform.
Yes, it's totally huge. And just to give you an example with the sort of analytics that we have on the platform, I mean, there's going to be like filters that will like do some cloud masking. There's also algorithms that will sharpen the image, like super resolution or pan sharpening algorithms. But then you get to the more like sophisticated stuff, and we're talking about like what Orbital Insights is offering, which is like object detection. So they have a number of algorithms that will use artificial intelligence to recognize what an airplane looks like, or what a car looks like, or trees and things like this. So you can run an algorithm, and this is a satellite image. You can get like a wide area, and you can run the algorithm on this wide surface area, and you can detect and count all of the airplanes that are running in an area, for example. Um, your particular solution may take advantage of that sort of data. You might be monitoring airplanes as they cross the ocean. You may be monitoring ships, or maybe you're monitoring like oil seepage from an oil reservoir. There's a lot of sophisticated things that you can do after the data is processed.
And just to be clear, as a customer, as a user of this platform, I would buy my block of data, and I would also buy the algorithm blocks. Is that correct? So I chain them together in whatever way I see fit, and but that's the thing that I purchase.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you're speaking to like, how does the money flow? Like, what does the business model look like? Um, as a customer, you only pay for usage. So you don't necessarily buy like a data block and then you can use it with a flat rate. We don't have that kind of a business model. You can assemble a workflow. So you snap together all of these blocks. And then when you run that workflow, so you like point it to a location in the world and you say, okay, now execute. The data is going to flow from the data block into the processing blocks and then out the web interface or the data or the API. And we are measuring the amount of data that's flowing and the compute time that the algorithms are using. And based on the usage of all of these resources, that's what you pay for.
Okay, and to be clear, the reason why I'm asking about this is I think this has been traditionally another barrier to entry in terms of online platforms where users are paying for the read writes to the disk, just as an example. And in terms of a web mapping solution, it's really difficult to calculate. How much am I actually going to use here? And I think that's why people have shied away in some instances from using these platforms because they can't budget for it.
That's right. And even in our early stages here at Up 42, even when we were in our closed beta, we had a list of about 100 customers, users on the platform, and all of them were saying we need a price estimation tool. It was like the highest, it was the highest requested feature that we were hearing, and so we're working on that. We don't have like a particularly good solution in place right now, but we have a way of measuring the amount of data that you're downloading, obviously, um, and then also forecasting how long algorithms are going to take based on that data that flows through it. And so we have sort of an initial price estimation tool on our platform, but that is definitely going to improve over time as we get more data and more usage.
At the start of this interview, you talked a little bit about the experience you had at Amazon, or you mentioned at least that you used to work at Amazon. And I think this is probably one of the most well-known marketplaces in the world. When you think about that as a marketplace, and now you're building your own marketplace, are there any lessons from that you can take and say, okay, well, this would be great just in a geospatial context or in another context? Are there things that we can use from Amazon that Amazon does particularly well, just as an example, in what you're building today?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I used to work at Amazon, and so I had the inside view, but also as just a regular consumer, I do a lot of my shopping on Amazon, and I think that there's a lot of lessons that we can take away from Amazon, such as Amazon is probably the biggest marketplace in the world. Um, we know it as consumers as a place to buy stuff, right? There's just a big selection of products. But what that is like Amazon has a number of merchants that are selling their own products on Amazon, and Amazon has first party products that they're selling. Like you've probably seen the Amazon Basics. If you wanted to buy an HDMI cord, for example, you might go for the name brand product, and that's probably sold through a merchant. Or you might go for the Amazon Basics brand, and that's like a first party Amazon product. Um, in this case here, you know, for customers to come to a marketplace and have a very wide selection of products that they could purchase is a very powerful concept. It makes it easier for consumers to get what they need, and it's profitable. Like when we lower that barrier to entry, you see a lot more throughput, and I think we're doing that here at Up 42 as well. So it is a marketplace where we have both first party products, and that would be like from Airbus, the Airbus data, some Airbus algorithms. But there's also a lot of third-party products on the platform. So, you'll get 21AT imagery on 42's platform. You also see like a bunch of analytics algorithms from Orbital Insight or from LiveEO or Pink Matter and things like that. It's a one-stop shop. So customers can come there and they can browse a wide selection, and they can feel assured that everything is interoperable on the platform, and they can just pick and choose, combine, form a workflow, and use it for their own products. Um, I do want to make another point. It's a little bit more subtle though. It's another lesson that I learned from Amazon. Actually, it was after I left Amazon and went to Netflix. Um, as you know, Netflix runs this like huge video streaming service, and everybody in the world is using it. Um, and Netflix competes directly with Amazon Prime Video, and they are like head-to-head competitors here. I think Netflix is farther ahead, but still, they compete with each other. But interestingly, Netflix is built on AWS, which is also owned by Amazon. And it's interesting that Amazon is able to segment their product in such a way that they can be very, very friendly with Netflix in one aspect and also competitive with Netflix in a different aspect. That is a really, really interesting concept to me because so far, what I've experienced in this geospatial industry is that a lot of companies here are extremely competitive with each other. They're like cutthroat competitive with each other. They seem to have the mindset that there's a fixed pie here, and in order for me to increase my share of it, I need to take somebody else's. But I don't think that's the case. Like, I think that if we can segment our products, that will allow us to be more collaborative with each other. And through this cooperation, we can grow the pie instead of just being so cutthroat competitive, just the way that Amazon does it.
I think that's a really important point to make, because I could imagine if I was a third party seller on your site, I might be a little bit afraid that maybe you are going to show my offerings to less people, for example. It would get into almost like a the Amazon walled garden approach, where there's user ratings and they upvote or compete unfairly with their house brand against third party sellers.
Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, I can understand that concern. However, like if you think about all the merchants that are selling their products on Amazon, like they obviously are experiencing a whole different dynamic. Instead of being worried so much about the competition, they view Amazon as a a place to access a lot more customers than they could probably get to their own website. There's a lot of people on Amazon, and they can access that revenue stream if they put their product on Amazon, as opposed to if they only sold direct sales from their own website. So there's two ways of looking at it. We hope they go for the latter.
I'm sure they will, especially after listening to this interview. Hey, if we could just stay with the Amazon example for a moment, and also add in a data portal example. And I think traditionally it's been really hard to make a really great geospatial data portal. At least when I look around the examples out there in the world, there is plenty of really poor data portals. And for me, poor means it's really difficult to find the data that I'm interested in. Sure, a lot of data is open now, and you know in quotation marks, freely accessible, but it's difficult to find. You're talking about having huge amounts of data on your platform. How are you going to surface this data? How are you going to show the right data to the right user? And if we think about Amazon, for example, I'm sure if I went to Amazon and typed in iPhone, for example, there'd be a lot of third party sellers, other people selling iPhones or some other commodity product. And they use user ratings, upvoting, downvoting, that kind of thing, to surface the best product for the user. What are you going to do to help users get around in this massive amount of data and algorithms?
I mean, that is a great question. I think that right now, just to be fully transparent, we aren't doing that great of a job. Like we have a list of all of our data sources, and we're not really helping users to find the right one. But this is a starting point for us, and we had to get started basically, and we will improve from here. Now, in the future, though, this is what we're building. Um, we're building a way for customers to basically start with a search box. It'll allow them to enter an area of interest. So it could be an address, a GPS coordinate, basically some place in the world. They'll enter that location, and then they'll see a map with that location pinned on the map. And then they'll be able to see all of the imagery that we have available on our platform that's taken at that place and the acquisition dates. I think that customers are extremely interested in this sort of an interface where they can see all of the imagery that's taken. This spans multiple different satellite constellations, and not just satellites. It'll be like drones, it'll be other sources of data as well. From there, they'll say, okay, now maybe I want the spot satellite imagery. I'll start with that as a data source. And then from that, they can start to connect the analytics blocks, the processing blocks. So that will start their workflow. Um, this is the new interface that we envision because of what we're hearing from customers. It will put the imagery, the data front and center. It'll give them insight into when the data was taken, so because a lot of times the acquisition date is of critical importance to them, and then also we're monitoring to see, like, of certain locations in the world, what sort of data is the most popular. So if we have like a highly rural area and it's like forest area or something like this, we might we might notice that um, a certain kind of imagery is being used for that specific spot in the world. We would rank those imagery sources closer to the top. So this is sort of like what Amazon does as well. When you search for a product on Amazon, maybe I search for a screwdriver, for example. Amazon is like sorting the list of results that come back to me so that the one that Amazon thinks I'll be most interested in is like the top. We will be doing the same thing. So we'll be looking and monitoring usage data to give customers an indication for what would be most useful to them given a specific point in the world.
I think that is an incredibly powerful idea because, like I said earlier, at some stage there's going to be a lot of data on your platform, and that idea that you can match data to a customer's need, I think that that's really brilliant, especially when we're thinking outside of satellite data or imagery. For example, you talked about bicycles before. Is there anything with a location? If I come to your platform, say, sure, maybe I start off by narrowing down my search. With an area, with a polygon, or with a point, or something like that. But at some stage, I want to, what's the latest maybe, or what's been used the most, or what's the most popular. I think this is a really, really great idea.
Yeah, and like I guess a way for us to sort of understand this concept um, is autocomplete. You know, I know that autocomplete gets ragged on a lot because sometimes it comes up wrong, but autocomplete also helps a lot. Like the recent change in Gmail, how like it'll autocomplete the rest of your sentence if you wanted to. That's using pretty sophisticated machine learning algorithms there, where it's like looking at how you formulate your sentences and it's guessing at what you might want to do for the current sentence at hand. In a similar way, if you start with a location in the world, we will basically suggest to you what sort of data source you might be interested in, and maybe you select a data source. Then we will suggest other processing algorithms that you might want to layer on top of that to help refine that data. So it's kind of like autocomplete, where we are suggesting things that are based on usage, maybe for you and also for other customers as well.
And I think this is really important because what you're doing is you're democratizing access to these things, to these data sources, and to these algorithms. But in doing that, you're attracting, or hopefully attracting, a whole new market segment that perhaps doesn't have that background in geospatial that other users have already. So I think it's really important to be able to hold their hand a little bit along the journey and sort of help them, guide them through it. And that leads me on to the next question. In doing this, uh, what kind of industries do you think that aren't using geospatial today will use it, or do you have any sort of target markets for your platform, for your services?
So yeah. I mean, this is like super. This is a super interesting topic, and I'm always tickled when I talk to customers and I ask them like, how do you plan to use this data? Like, what do you want to do? And they will describe the most interesting use cases ever. Like even yesterday, I was talking to a company, and they already have a product in place using drones and airplanes, but they want to expand into satellites now, and that's why he was talking to me to get access to the satellite data. What they're doing is they're looking at forests. There are companies out there that are maintaining these forests, and they are specifically looking for distressed trees within the forest that are basically hosting these hibernating beetles inside of the tree bark. It is like I would never have
Okay.
come up with this on my own.
Yeah.
So
So
this,
that's definitely the long tail of the spectrum, what we're seeing there.
well, sure, I'll talk about some other cases as well, but this is just one that I heard yesterday. So basically, these beetles are infesting the tree inside of the bark, and if you can get the data for which trees are infected before the beetles wake up and start infecting the other trees, then you can go and cut down the tree and treat it immediately. And so that sort of data is what he is like coming up with. That's his product. But there are other companies out there too. Like we're working with an oil and gas company that is using satellite imagery to monitor their oil reservoirs. And they have specific algorithms that are also running on Up42, which they've created the algorithm. and they're running it on a 42 that will be able to detect oil seepage. So they have these like floating oil reservoirs on the water. If they don't have a good way of monitoring this on a daily or weekly basis, if an oil starts, if an oil leak starts, it could, the longer it goes undetected, the more devastating it can be. So having a good detection system in place is of critical importance to them. That's what they're using UP42 for. There's a lot of other use cases though, like I can go into this all day.
I think we've talked about a few sort of industry-based use cases, if I can describe it in those words. Have you seen any sort of consumer-based use cases? We're all consumers, of course, but what I'm getting at is the public. So me, for example, where I, as an individual, not as part of a company, could use your services, or could you imagine individuals using your services in the future, just for solving consumer-based problems?
Yeah, that's something that we haven't really touched too much of yet. I've heard a few cases, but I haven't actually seen the real world usage for it yet. I would love to get into that. I mentioned, the bike sharing apps and things like that. I want to attract those type of customers onto our platform as well, but we're not quite there yet. Like our starting point for our customers is basically B2B.
Yeah, of course. And this is by no means a critique of what you're doing at all. I was just always interested to see that often these things in the geospatial world, because they're so heavy in terms of processing time, or that the data is expensive, or you need this deep sort of understanding of geospatial to be able to use these products, that they're very B2B focused.
Uh-huh.
And I'm always interested in use cases that are more sort of business to consumer, B2C focused.
Yes, yes.
Hey, we're slowly but surely coming to the end of our time together, but I've got one more question before I let you go, and that would be, what is this going to look like in the future? If you could look 5 years out, what are we going to see in terms of Up 42?
Okay, I love this question. um, I guess the best way to answer this question is to give a bit of an analogy or an example. Um, and I want to just rewind the clock a little bit to the mid 1990s, because that's when I was a 16-year-old boy in high school. And I got my driver's license for the first time. And I wanted to take my first trip with my friends into downtown DC to have dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe. And at that time, geospatial data took the form of a map book of Washington, D.C. It was a book with pages in it. The first page had like an overview with a grid on it. You had to find your letter and your number on the grid, and then flip to the corresponding page. Then you would get like a more detailed view. And there's like streets, there's landmarks, there's rivers and bridges and things like that. In preparation for my trip, I created a list of turn-by-turn directions. And then we set off. We started driving on the highway, and we exited the highway. And as you know, like new driver here, 16 years old, you take the first wrong turn, and the rest of your turn-by-turn directions are just crap. Like you're not able to use it anymore. You're lost. And the friends that I had in the car, like we just kept making turns and turns and getting more and more lost. And then eventually we ended up into like the deepest and the darkest part of DC. It's the hood, and it was a residential area where you had groups of people that are just hanging out on the curb. For me, it was quite a scary place. And we parked our car, and I broke out the map book to try to reorient myself and figure out how to get to our destination. And there was this really loud knock on my driver's side door, and there was this huge man. Um, he gestured to me to open my window, which I naively did. And then he says, "Are you kids lost?" And I'm like, "Yes, we're lost." I didn't say it, but my eyes, I was nodding up and down saying, "Yes, we're lost." And then he just says to me, "Not a good place to be lost." Turns around and he walks away.
Yeah.
He scared the living daylights out of me and my friends. And so, of course, we just turn on the engine and we just jet out of there like a bat out of hell. Like that's what you do when you're lost, And I think that if you look at what geospatial data is, it's like, well, when it's hard to use, you get lost. and you run away.
Yeah.
But you fast forward now to like 2019, and I just relocated here to Berlin. And even though it's a brand new city, I pull out my phone and there's Google Maps. It's very, very easy to use. I know exactly where I am, as represented by a blue dot on the map. I can plot my course. I know when I'm going to arrive. I know even the opening and closing times of my destination. Like there's a whole bunch of very useful geospatial data that is ready at my fingertips. And not only that, like Google Maps has done a great job in their API. So there's a lot of businesses out there that are pulling data from Google Maps, and they're using that data in their own products and services. So if you go to a restaurant website, for example, you'll see a little snippet of a map that shows you where the restaurant is located. That comes from Google Maps, and like Uber in the early days used to use Google Maps to show you where the cars are located, and when they're going to arrive at where you are. Like, I think that Google has done a great job at democratizing geospatial data, and you're seeing like evidence of it being like it's infiltrating. It's like being integrated in so many parts of our lives, and it really does change the way we live. And Up 42 is doing a similar thing. We are lowering the barrier to entry, making it easier for people to use geospatial data. The more successful we are in this, the more use cases you will see, and the more deeply integrated it's going to be in various applications out there. You're going to see like not just maps, places of interest, and routes, which is primarily what Google Maps offers you. You're going to see access to very powerful satellite data, different resolutions. You can specify the different acquisition dates, the different bands that the satellite sensors are shooting at. It might even be radar data, which gives you millimeter differences in elevation. We're going to see a lot more power at the fingertips of software developers out there that are creating new applications. So you're going to see this on your phone. Like the result of all of this data is going to be put in new and interesting applications. And I think that's what we're going to see in the next 5 years. We're going to just have new ways of running our lives using geospatial data, which we won't think of it as like geospatial data explicitly, but we will be using it nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree. And always think it's fascinating talking to people like you that are on the cutting edge of the geospatial industry and are out there breaking down the barriers and removing the gates, so people can have access to it and democratizing, in your case, data and algorithms. And I feel sometimes that people are perhaps a little bit afraid by this. I used to be a gatekeeper. I was the in-house GIS or geospatial resource, or I was doing something else. And here's somebody else who's going to make it easier to access my knowledge and get the result, if you know what I mean. They're going to bypass me. But personally, I'm really inspired by this. I think that this is going to create a huge amount of opportunity for the GIS or geospatial industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that this is going to become like a major, major industry out there. Um, there's going to be new professions for, we call them data scientists right now, but they're going to be data scientists that are specifically focused on geospatial data because it's going to be there's going to be a real big need for that to process that sort of data.
Absolutely. Again, Eli, this has been inspiring and fascinating talking with you. I've really, really enjoyed it. We are running out of time now. So I hope that you could just let the listeners know where they could go to follow along or learn more about you and your work at Up 42.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first place is obviously our website. It's up42.com. And if I spell it out, it's up42.com. So it's a very short URL. And otherwise, we have Up42 Official on Instagram and Twitter. You can reach out to us on our and LinkedIn as well. You can reach out to us on our social channels. We are developing a blog as well, which you can subscribe to and keep up to date. But mostly, like if you come to our website, sign up for a user account, just try it out. You get 10,000 free credits right off the bat without having to pay for anything. Just give it a shot and give us the feedback too. Like that's really what I'm interested in. Like I'm interested in learning from our users and our customers. So shout out to me. Also, yeah, I don't know if I should do this, but if you want to email me directly, My email address is eli.tamanaha@up42.com. That's eli.tamanaha@up42.com. I'd be happy to hear, what kind of use cases you're working on, what sort of products you would like to use geospatial data for. We'll have I'd love to engage in these conversations. So reach out to me directly too.
Eli, thank you so much for giving the listeners to this podcast the opportunity to learn more about you. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Right at the start of this episode, I talked a little bit about our sponsor, Hive Mapper. That's Hive as in Beehive Mapper. And I told you a little story about a problem that they could have solved for me. When I was at university, I was using a thermal video camera to create a huge thermal map of a city that I was interested in at the time. So what I'd done is I'd taken this camera out of the front of a BMW, mounted it on a plane and flown it over the city a couple of times, and that gave me video footage back, which was great. I mean, the idea was that I could take the video footage apart frame by frame, stitch them together and create these layers of thermal imagery over the city. So instead of doing all that manually, if I had had access to Hive Mapper back in the day, I could have just uploaded that and they would have created these 3D layers for me automatically and georeferenced them. So another thing I discovered with this project to build this huge thermal mapper of a city was that I wanted to repeat the process, and I could do that, so I flew some more lines over the city and collected some more data, but eventually I also wanted to look at changes over time. How was the scene underneath me, underneath the camera, changing over time? So what I did is I went out and I flew a few more lines over the city, collected some more data, and then ran some very basic sort of change detection algorithms on these data sets that I had collected. And what I could see was, pixel values changing over time, and that was interesting. But when I think about what Hive Mapper does, they don't just look at the changing pixel values, they look at objects that are actually physically removed or added to the scene over time. And I think this is an incredibly powerful tool, and I can see a lot of really interesting use cases for it. So if you're interested in this, just search for Hive Mapper, that's Hive as in beehivemapper.com, and you'll find lots of interesting information on their website. And that's it for another episode of the Mapscaping Podcast. My name is Daniel, and I really want to thank you for tuning in again this week. I really appreciate it. I also really appreciate your kind ratings and reviews on iTunes. It really means a lot to me, and I read every single one of them. And as always, you are more than welcome to reach out to me on our social media channels. To do that, you'll find some really useful links in the show notes. That's it from me. We'll talk again next week. Bye.